Shalom everyone, hope everyone's doing well. Shavua Tov. B'ezrat Hashem, tonight we're going to review last week's Gemara, which was from Yud Bet Amud Bet, close to the bottom of the page, at Gufa Amar Shmuel, about 10-12 lines from the bottom of the page. From Yud Bet Amud Bet there till Yud Tet Vav Amud Aleph, the bottom of the page. We're going to have 7 sections in today's review, and our learning, as always, should be a zechut, a merit for refuah shlema, a quick, speedy, and complete recovery for Yaakov ben Dina. And we should hear b'sarot tovot, only good news. So b'ezrat Hashem, let's get started at Gufa Amar Shmuel, Yud Bet Amud Bet 12b. Gufa Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel had left off last week. We made a statement 2 weeks ago, actually, with the following thing: Ein ma'avrin et hashana b'yom shloshim shel Adar. That the court is not allowed to add a second Adar if they've already reached the 30th day of Adar, because Shmuel says, since that day theoretically could be Aleph Nisan, as the previous month could be 29 days, so it wouldn't be appropriate then to make that into a new Adar. Before that you could, after that you could not. Says the Gemara Ivromai, but what's the halacha if a person, the Beit Din went ahead and did it anyways, they added the extra Adar? Samul says it is effective, but ein mekachin et hachodesh. You cannot sanctify that Rosh Chodesh for Adar Sheni, because that would already be too much. That would be inappropriate. It would be to some degree making a leap year after, to a certain degree, Nisan came. So instead, you would just allow it to become Adar Sheni. Don't declare it Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, and then a month later, when it's Nisan, Nisan will also be declared. That already could be declared properly. Says the Gemara, Kid Shumai. Okay, well, what happens if they did consecrate the Rosh Chodesh? They went ahead and they declared it. They did Mekudesh, the whole process, and they did sanctify the new month of Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. So Merava Bata Le'ibor. Rava says now it undoes what they were attempting to do in terms of adding the old month, and now instead of being Adar Sheni, now it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's Rav. Rav Nachman Rav Nachman says no. The leap year remains, and it's sanctified as Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav says there's a technical issue that this creates, because Michti. We know from Purim to Pesach is 30 days. And since you're supposed to learn the laws of the festival 30 days before, so they would have already started learning the halachot of Pesach. The rabbi in Shul would have already started to teach that from Purim. Titania, as the Braita says, Shalin Belchot Pesach Kodem LePesach Shloshim Yom. You're supposed to learn 30 days before. Rav Shimon Gamliel argues it says 2 weeks, but we know that Tanakama says 30 days. The problem then is that when Purim is over, they're going to start learning the halachot of Pesach. And when they hear that they've sanctified Rosh Chodesh, when they hear that Rosh Chodesh rolls around, merachakin lei, and they distance it, means they push off Nisan and they make it instead Adar Sheni, atila zolzule bechametz. What's going to happen is people are going to assume it must be the big court made a mistake, because we've already been learning the halachot of Pesach for 15 days, and this is going to create an issue because they'll keep Pesach a month early, and then a month later, which is not really Pesach, they'll refrain from the things that they're not going to refrain from eating chametz, which is a big issue. So Rav Nachman said back, made the idea, people know they know that the year is dependent on calculation, and they'll assume the rabbis just didn't conclude that calculation until now, so it's not really going to create such a mistake. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Now we get into one of the main reasons to make a leap year, which is that the seasons and the Yamim Tovim don't align as they're supposed to, as determined by the Torah. So just to remember, Sukkot, and we'll see actually 3 shitot, which parts, but Sukkot is supposed to fall out in the autumn. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Ein ma'avrin et hashana, eli im ken hayta tkufa chasera ruba shel chodesh. So this is Shmuel's opinion, as we'll see in the position, and I'll get to a discussion of Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, which is within Shmuel's position. So you're not supposed to make a leap year unless the majority of Tkufat Tammuz, which is the summer, extends into, means that the month of Tishrei is covered in majority mostly by the summer, which means the autumn only begins in the minority of the month. V'kama, how much is that's necessary for the summer to extend into Tishrei to make a leap year? Ruba shel chodesh, v'kama ruba shel chodesh. So how much is the majority of the month? Shisha aser yom div Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says, which is Shmuel's position, Rabbi Yehuda, 16 days, and as we'll explain, because then you won't have all of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn as it's meant to be. Rabbi Yossi Omer Chad V'Esrim Yom. Rabbi Yossi says 21 days would require, if the summer extends 21 days into Tishrei, would require a leap year, because then you won't even have one day of Tishrei, of Chol HaMoed in the autumn. Now they both get their shitot, according to Shmuel, from one pasuk. The pasuk says, Chag Asif Tkuvat Hashana. It says the ingathering season, which is Sukkot, is the end of the year, the change of the seasons, where the summer changes into the autumn. So the way they expound it is like this. Chag Asif means the time of Sukkot that you gather in, which is not the holiday itself. It's Chol HaMoed because you can't gather in the crops on the Chag. Rather, it's Chol HaMoed, Davar Aved, for example. That has to be during the time of the change, i.e. some of it has to be in the autumn. So Mar Savar Yehuda holds Kulei Chag Ba'inan B'Tkufat Chadasha. The entire Chol HaMoed needs to be in the autumn. So therefore, if the summer extends till the 16th, you won't have the first day of Chol HaMoed in the autumn, you make a leap year. Umar Savar and Rabbi Yossi holds Miktzad Chag Ba'ina B'Tkufa Chadasha, only some of it, you need one day of it. So if it extends till the 21st, you don't even have one day in the new season in autumn. That's an issue, but if you have one day, it wouldn't be an issue. Maika Savri, so the Gemara says, let's analyze these opinions. What do they hold regarding the day of the equinox? The autumnal equinox in the context here. If they hold that the day of the equinox is the conclusion of the previous season, which means that the autumnal equinox is actually still part of the summer, so belav hachinami, even without it being like this, says the Gemara, lo lemanda amar kulei chagika, even if it only extends till the 15th, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or if the summer extends till the 20th, according to Rabbi Yossi, lo lemanda amar kulei chagika, you wouldn't have the entire Chol HaMoed, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the autumn. Nor would you have, according to Rabbi Yossi, one day of Chol HaMoed, because the next day is still part of the previous season. Kasavri must be that they hold Yom Tkufa Matchil, that the day of the autumnal equinox is actually the beginning of the next season. So therefore, in a scenario where the summer extends till the 16th, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that means the autumnal equinox will be the next day. That begins the autumn. The problem is the 16th, which is the first day of Chol HaMoed, is still part of the summer. And the same idea with Rabbi Yossi. Now the Gemara quotes two Braithot actually, that challenge Shmuel's understanding of this machloket. So the Braita number 1 says like this: Yom Tkufa Gomer Div Rabbi Yehuda. Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda holds the equinox day is the conclusion of the previous season, not the beginning of the next season. Question number 1 against Shmuel. And furthermore, Rabbi Yossi Omer Yom Tkufa Matchil. Rabbi Yossi would agree, like Shmuel was saying before, which is that the autumnal equinox is the beginning of the next season, but this is still difficult within the position of Rabbi Yossi, of Rabbi Yehuda. And furthermore, Tanya of another Braita that says, Ein Mavrin Tashanan. I'll have 5 opinions here, and we'll explain them further, but we're just showing now a question against Shmuel's opinion. So the Braita says, Ein Mavrin Tashanan, you don't make a leap, you add the extra Adar, Elim Ken Aitat Kufa Chasera Rubo Shel Chodesh. Unless the summer covers most of Tishrei. V'kama Rubo Shel Chodesh, how much is most of it? So the Tanakama here says, Shisha Ser Yom, 16 days in. Now that sounds like the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda as explained by Shmuel, but this is the Tanakama, not Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shtei Yadot B'Chodesh, 2/3 of the month. V'kama Shtei Yadot B'Chodesh, how much is 2/3? Chaf Yom, 20 days. Now this actually sounds like the position of Rabbi Yossi, that you just need one day of Chol HaMoed in the autumn, as Shmuel explained, but this is Rabbi Yehuda, that's the Kasha. Rabbi Yossi Omer Mechashvin Shisha Asar Lifnei Pesach. Rabbi Yossi says, we calculate, if 16 days, now we're going to the other season now, if 16 days of the winter extend into Nisan, Ma'abrin, you have to make a leap year. And as Rashi explains, because then you won't have, moving forward about 180 days, even one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn. Continues Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asar Yom Lifnei Achag, if 16 days of the summer extend into Tishrei, in Ma'abrin, you don't make a leap year. And we'll challenge this in a moment. But that's Rabbi Yossi's position. Rabbi Shimon Omer, the 4th opinion, Av Shisha Asar Yom Lifnei Achag Ma'abrin, even if the summer extends 16 days into Tishrei, you will make a leap year. Now that sounds very similar to the Tanakama. We'll explain that momentarily. And Achirim, in final opinion, Achirim say, which is usually Reb Meir, Mi'uto, even if the minority, which we'll have to explain what this means, the season extends into the month, you'll make a leap year. V'kam miyuto, how much is the minority amount? Arba aser yom, 14 days. But the bottom line is, you see Shmuel's position is challenged on two fronts. Number one is, you see Rabbi Yehuda holds that the tkufa, the day of the equinox, is the conclusion of the previous season. Number two, it sounds like he only requires one day of Chol HaMoed to be in the autumn, not all of it. Kashin, the Gemara says this is indeed difficult. Now let's analyze these five shitot of the Braita. Amar Mar, Rabbi Yehuda Omer shtei adot b'chodesh. Rabbi Yehuda said 2/3 of the month. If the summer extends into 2/3 of the month of Tishrei, then you'll make a leap year. Esrim yom. Shtei yadot b'chodesh esrim yom, which is 20 days. Rabbi Yossi said, Mechashvin shisha aser yom lefnei Pesach ma'abrin. If 16 days of the winter extend into Nisan, you'll make a leap year, which means then you won't have one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn. So the Gemara says, Han Rabbi Yehuda is the same opinion as Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara answers, Yom Tekufa Gomer, Yom Tekufa Matchil Lekebeinayu. Like we explained before, really the machloket between them is the day of the equinox treated like the previous season or the next season? Rabbi Yossi says Gomer, and Rabbi Yehuda says Gomer, Rabbi Yossi says Matchil. Amar, now Rabbi Yossi's opinion itself is inherently contradictory, because first he said that as long as you have one day of Chol HaMoed based on Nisan, the 16 days of Nisan being covered in the winter, that you won't even have one day of Nisan, of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn, you'll have to make a leap year, which means all you need is one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot to be in the autumn. But then Amar Mari says further, Shisha Aser Lefnei Chag, that if you have 16 days of the winter, of the summer, into Tishrei, Ein Ma'abrin, you wouldn't make a leap year. So the Gemara says, El Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Aser Lefnei Chag Hudelo, it's only if it goes 16 days, that the summer extends 16 days into Tishrei, Hashiv Ser V'Tamnei Ser Ma'abrin, but 17 or 18, actually till 20, you would make a leap year. V'ha'amar Shisha Aser Lefnei Pesach, in Batzir Lo. But the implication of the first statement is it's only an issue if you don't have one day of Chol HaMoed, but less than that, which means in Nisan, if the winter extends only till the 15th, you wouldn't make a leap year because you would have one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn. So the Gemara answers Lo. Now really Rabbi Yossi holds Kishitato, like his opinion, Idi v'idi ein ma'abrin, right? Regardless if it's the 16th through the 20th, you would not make a leap year if the summer extended into even till the 20th of Tishrei, because as long as you have one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the autumn, it would still be sufficient to not make a leap year. But since the beginning of his statement he said 16 days into Nisan, he also said 16 days into Tishrei, but really he means actually till 20 days in, and the 21st day could be the beginning of the new season. That would still be sufficient. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon said, the fourth opinion, that even if it's 16 days into Sukkot, you would make Ma'abrin, you'd make a leap year because you need all of Chol HaMoed Sukkot to be in the autumn. So the Gemara says, the same as the first opinion in the Braita, turning to Gimel Amud Bet. So the Gemara answers, Yom Tekufa Matchil v'Yom Tekufa Gomer v'Lo Mesaimi. The difference between Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Shimon is the same machloket Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda if the equinox day is like the old season or the beginning of the new season, but it's not clear, it's not apparent from their discussion which way each one will hold. Now Acherim, the fifth opinion in the Braita was Acherim. Acherim said mi'uto. Now we're assuming at this point that we're talking about Tishrei. So even if a minority, if the summer extends into a minority of Tishrei, you'll still make a leap year. Become Yutor Ba'asar Yom, 14 days. So the Gemara says, "My Kasavri, what does Acherim hold? Kasavri, even if he holds Yom Tkufa Gomer v'Kulei Chag Ba'inan, that the conclusion that the Yom Tkufa, the day of the equinox, of the autumnal equinox, is the end of the old season, and even if he holds you need all of Chol HaMoed Sukkot to be in the autumn, Ha'ika, still you have it, because it would come out that the 15th, which is the next day, would be the autumnal equinox, and the next day, the 16th, certainly would be considered, which is the first day of Sukkot. Even if the old, which is the first day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, would be in the autumn. So what would be the issue? So the Gemara gives two answers. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Achirim Tkufat Nisan Kaim. He's not talking about Tishrei. He's talking about how far the winter extends into Nisan. Like the pasuk tells us, Shemor et Chodesh Aviv. The pasuk tells us, make sure that the spring begins within the first 14 days, which is the renewal of the moon of Nisan. Shmor Aviv shel Tkufa sheheh b'chodesh Nisan. Make sure that the spring season, Tkufat Nisan, begins in the first 14 days of Nisan. So the Gemara says, but still I don't understand. So let's say that the winter extends till the 14th. You don't need to add an extra month. Just make Adar from 29 days to 30 days, and then it'll pull it back one day, and spring will begin on the 14th day of Nisan. So the Gemara answers Enochanami, but you have to understand what Acherim means. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Tana milmal lemata kachashiv. The Tana Acherim is counting from the larger number till the smaller number. He's saying like this: if the winter extends at least 30 days into the month of Nisan, down to 15 days of the month of Nisan. This is what he means to say. Ad miuto, till miuto, but not including the 14th, ma'abrin, you'll make a leap year. Because if it extends till the 15th, so then the issue would be that pulling it back one day by adding one extra day to Adar wouldn't help you, because the day of the equinox would still be an issue, as that's part of the old season. But v'kama miuto, how much is the minority that you wouldn't have to make a leap year? Arba asar yom, which means if the season of the winter extends till the 14th, so you don't have to make a leap year actually, you just add one more day, that would be sufficient to Adar. Now Ravina says, La'olam achirim b'tishrei kaim. Really is talking about the general conversation of the Braita, which is Tishrei. The Kasavri but Achirim holds, Kulei chag ba'inan ve'yom tov rishon. Not only do you need all of Chol HaMoed to be in the autumn, but even the first day of Chag, of Sukkot as well. Asks the Gemara, Yom Tov Rishon, Chag HaAsif K'tiv. We know the Pasuk says Chag HaAsif, which we interpreted before to mean the time you could gather on Sukkot, which does not include the first day of Sukkot. So the Gemara answers, Chag Haba B'zman Asifa. No, the way you have to understand the Pasuk is, the festival that comes at the time people are gathering in, but it includes the first day, it has to all be in the autumn, and therefore, in the scenario that the Tkufat Tammuz, the summer extends till the 14th, what's going to happen now is the next day will be the 15th, which is the autumnal equinox. The problem is that's still attributed to the previous month, the previous season, which is part of the summer and not part of the autumn. And that will create the issue that you don't have the entire festival in the autumn. Let's move on to the third section now. The Smichad's Kenim. We said in the Mishnah that when these Kenim would bring a korban, Par ha'elam davar shel tzibur, where they paskin wrongly and the tzibur mostly engaged in inappropriate behavior, so they have to lean on the animal. It's machloket if 3 of them or 5 of them have to lean on the animal. So says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, says the Braita, v'samchu ziknei. So the Braita says the elders shall lean on the animal. Yachol ziknei ashuk. You might think it's just ordinary elders. Talmud Omar Eda. Use the word Eda, which means it has to be judges. Maybe it just means the smaller courts, the judges of the 23-person courts. Talmud Lomar Haida, therefore it says the one, the unique one, which means that there has to be representatives of the 71-person court, the Sanhedrin Gdolah. The Kamehin, how many people have to represent them? So it's machloket. Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'samchu eshnayim ziknei eshnayim." Samchu is 2, ziknei is 2. Ve'en beitin shakul. You can't have an even number of courts. So mesifin alein odechad. You add one more, so there's a total of 5. Rekan chamisha di Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says ziknei eshnayim, ziknei is 2. Ve'en beitin shakul. You can't have an even court. Mesifin alein odechad. You add one more. Rekan shlosha, and therefore you have a total of 3. Asks the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon, achti v'samchu. What does Rabbi Shimon learn from the word v'samchu? So the Gemara answers, "Aumi baile legufei." No, it needs it for itself that they have to lean on the head of the animal. Rabbi Yehuda legufei lo tzarich. Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't need it to teach us that, because because even if v'samchu is not used, if you say v'samchu is not used for an additional drasha, l'chtov, the Torah could have just written Ziknei Aida Yedeim al Rosh HaPar. The elders of the congregation, their hands should be on the head of the par. So meaning it's understood, al means on the head of the animal, that they lean on it, so therefore it must be it's for a different drasha to add 2 more to the number of representatives. Rabbi Shimon says back, Ichtiv Hachi, if it would have only said like that, Hava Amin, I would have said my al. What does al mean in the context of the verse, which it does sometimes mean? Al means bisamuch, it means nearby, but not on the head of the animal. So therefore it had to say v'samchu to teach me to actually lean on the animal. Rabbi Yehuda says, Gamar rosh me'olah. He derives the Gzerah Shabbat. Just by the Korban Olah, they have to lean on the head of the animal. So also it's clear that they have to lean on the head of the animal by this Michatz Kenim. The pasuk is therefore extra that it teaches you that the number. Rabbi Shimon lo Gamar rosh me'olah. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold this Gzerah Shabbat, and therefore he doesn't need to use it and he needs to use it for leaning all together, and that's why he only holds 3 people will lean on the head of the animal. Tana says the Braita. Moving on to the 4th section now, Smicha v'smichat zkenim begimel. It says Smicha, which we're going to have to define what this is, as well as smichat zkenim is with 3. Now, my smicha or my smichat zkenim. What is this smicha? Smichat zkenim we know refers to what we mentioned before, leading on the par helam davar shel tzibor. But what is the smicha we're referring to in this braita? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan mismach sabi. It means giving over what we call smicha, actually rabbinic ordination. It requires a court of 3 to give over to ordain a student as a rabbi. Amar le'abai Rav Yosef. I said to Rav Yosef, mismach sabi b'shlosha minan. What is the source for this principle that giving over smicha needs to be done in an assembly of 3 rabbis? If it's from the pasuk that says vayismoch et yadav alav, that Moshe leaned his hands on the head of Yoshua when he ordained him into practice. If that's true, Moshe is just one person, so maybe you'll need 1 rabbi. Maybe you'll tell me Moshe is like the representative of the whole Sanhedrin of 71. The problem then is, if that's truly so maybe you should need 71 people to ordain a rabbi. So Gemara says, Kasha, this is difficult. We don't have an answer for this. We don't know the source. You need 3 rabbis to give smicha. Now, Amar Rav Ashi. Biyada mamish samchinan. Do you actually have to lean with your hand on the student who's being ordained? Samchinle? So Rav Ashi said back, Samchinle b'shmat. No, we ordain with the name. Kari le Rebbe, they call him Rebbe, v'yahavi le reshuta le'medan dinei knasot. And they give him permission to adjudicate scenarios of penalties. So as Rashi explains, because penalties are things that are not as common, and also there's no loss of money. So therefore, the judges that are not ordained, and as Rashi says, those judges in Bavel, they were not allowed to adjudicate cases of penalties, but those who were ordained were allowed to. Unlike other things, for example, like loans or thefts. There they acted as representatives in Bavel, even though they didn't necessarily receive the ordination like this. Says the Gemara, v'chad lo samich, asks the Gemara, is one person not allowed to give smicha? V'ha'am Rav Yudah Marav Baram. Zachor ato ish l'tov. There's a certain person, remember for good, Rav Yudah ben Baba Shmo. His name was Rav Yudah ben Baba. She'el malei hu nishtachu dinei knasot miYisrael. Without him, the Jews would have forgotten the rules of penalties. The Gemara says, nishtachu? What do you mean they would have forgotten? Nigrasinu, we could have learned it from the books. Ella, the Gemara says, Yudal and Aleph, batzlu dinei knasot miYisrael. What it means is, it would have become batel, that we couldn't have adjudicated cases of penalties anymore, because smicha would have gone out of style, it would have been lost. Shapam achad, because one time Gazra Malchut Harashag Zeral Yisrael, the Romans, the wicked empire, decreed against the Jewish people. Shekol HaSomech Yareg. Anybody that gives smicha will be killed. We call it Nismach Yareg. And anybody that receives smicha will be killed. Be'ir shesomchin ba. And at Ir, the city that they give smicha, Techarev will be destroyed. V'tchumin shesmuchin ba bahen yakru. And the border areas will also be uprooted. Ma asa Yehuda ben Baba. What did Yehuda ben Baba do to maintain smicha? Halach v'yashav lo ben shnei arim gdolim. He sat between 2 great mountains. V'chein ubein shtei ayarot gdolo, between 2 big cities. Ubein shnei tchumei Shabbat, between 2 areas that were 2,000 amot away from 2 cities. Ben Ushal leShifram is 2 cities. V'samach sham chamishaz kenim ve'elu hein. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. He gave smicha to these 5 chachamim. Rav Avia Mosif after Rabbi Nechemya, and Rav Avia added also Rabbi Nechemya. Kiv and Sheikh Yeroi ve'im bahem. When the goyim realized what he had done, Amar lahem, he said to the students, Banai Rutzu, my sons run away. Amrulo, they said, Rebbe, Mate Alecha, what's going to be with you? Amar lahem, he said, Hareini mutal lifneim ke'evan she'en lo ofchim. I'll be like a stone that can't be overturned. Means they'll kill me, but run away. Amrulo, they said, Lo zazu misham ad shenatzu bo shalosh meot lunviot shel barzel v'asu kikvara. That Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba didn't move from there till the Romans pierced his body by 300 spears of iron, made him like a sieve. They killed him. But the point is you see clearly in his great Mesirut Nefesh, nonetheless, he gave smicha as an individual. So you see, you don't need 3. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, achrini havu ba'adeh. There were 2 other people with him there. It was just in the honor of Yehuda ben Baba. They weren't listed because you don't want to create an equivalency because of his greatness. Asks the Gemara a side question. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, Samchet, did Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba really give Rabbi Meir smicha? V'ha'amar Rabba Bar Bar Chanam Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Omer Rabbi Meir lo samcho Rabbi Akiva eno ala toeh. Anybody that says Rabbi Akiva didn't give Rabbi Meir smicha is making a mistake. So it's like Rabbi Akiva gave him smicha. My answer is Samchet Rabbi Akiva lo kiblo. What happened was Rabbi Meir was young when he received smicha from Rabbi Akiva, so they didn't take it seriously. Samchet Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, when Rabbi Meir was a little older, he received smicha Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba v'kiblo, and people accepted it. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, ein smicha b'chutz haaretz. Let's discuss another halacha of smicha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says there's no smicha in chutz haaretz. So my ein smicha, what does that mean? If it means that they cannot adjudicate cases of kanas, of penalties in chutz la'aretz, because we don't take the smicha there, even if they received it from Eretz Yisrael, you can't adjudicate like in Eretz Yisrael. The problem is, the Mishnah Masechet Makot tells us, Sanhedrin noheged bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, that the Sanhedrin, 23 people courts, are applicable both in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz, and we know included in that is penalties. So Ella, what it means is the lo samchina b'chutz la'aretz. You can't convey smicha, confer smicha outside of Israel. So the Gemara says pshita, it's obvious. Somchin b'chutz la'aretz v'nismachin ba'aretz. If only the ones receiving smicha are in Eretz Yisrael and the rabbis giving it are in chutz la'aretz, that's not effective because ha'amrinan delo, that's not effective. Ella somchin ba'aretz v'nismachin b'chutz la'aretz. But if you have the rabbis giving it in Eretz Yisrael, students in chutz la'aretz, what's the halacha? Could you give smicha in such a scenario? So Tashma, the Gemara says, let's bring a proof from a story. Rabbi Yochanan mitztar leid Rabbi Shem bar Abba de lohava gabayu de lismechei. Rabbi Yochanan was very bothered. Rabbi Shem bar Abba was not near him in order to give him smicha, and therefore you see clearly because he wasn't by him, you can't give smicha to students that are in chutz la'aretz away from you. And the Gemara goes on and tells us a similar story. Rabbi Shimon ben Zirud v'chad di'imei uman Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai v'amrila Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai v'chad di'imei uman Rabbi Shimon ben Zirud. So these two students, Chad dahavu gabayu samchu. One that was near Rabbi Yochanan, he gave him smicha. V'chad delahavu gabayu lo samchu. The other one was not near him, he did not give him smicha. Rabbi Chanin and Rabbi Yoshaya, these two students, Hava kamit mishtakid Rabbi Yochanan l'smechinu. Rabbi Yochanan really wanted l'smechinu to give them smicha. Lo hava mistaya milta, but he was never able to, was never successful. As Rashi explains, there was never 3 judges there when these two students would come. So Hava kamit star too, Rabbi Yochanan was very bothered. So Amr Leilon et Starmar, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, don't be bothered. Hanami debate Eli Katinan, because we, Rabbi Chanin and Rabbi Shaya, are from the family of Eli. Amr Shmuel bar Nachman, Rabbi Yonatan, Menayin she'enis machin lebeit Eli. How do we know that the people from Eli's house that descended from Eli Kohen are not going to receive smicha? Shneimar, like it says, Lo yeh zaken beveitcha kol hayamim. As part of the punishment of Eli, because he didn't correct his children's negative behaviors, there will never be a zaken in your house all the days. So my zaken, what does that mean? Ilim a zaken mamash. If it means they won't get old, we already know that from a different pasuk. It says, Kol marbit beitcha yamut tu anashim. They won't live beyond 18. That's already a different curse. Ela smicha, it means they won't receive smichas. They said, don't worry, because we're not destined to receive it anyways as descendants of the house of Eli. Rabbi Zera hava mitamer lemismechinu. Rabbi Zera avoided, hid himself so that he wouldn't have to receive smicha. The Amar Rabbi Lazar leolam have kabel. A person should always be in the dark, right? Not in the limelight. V'kayem, in order to live. When he heard the statement of Rabbi Lazar, which was that a person doesn't ascend to greatness unless he's forgiven for all of his sins, he pushed himself. He wanted to receive smicha in order to be forgiven for his sins. And the Gemara tells us, when they gave Rabbi Zera smicha, they sang the following song to him, praises. He doesn't have all these glorifications of eye paint and face paint and braiding of the hair, and he still finds favor, means he's just a brilliant Talmid Chacham altogether. When they gave smicha to Rabbi Ami Ravasi, they sang the following thing: Kol min dain, samchu alana. Anyone like this, give them smicha for us. But lo tismechu lana, lo misarmitin. But don't give smicha to the rags, meaning the people who don't necessarily have the adequate knowledge to paskin. Velo misarmitin, nor from those that twist things and give the wrong pshatim. Amil and others say lo michamisin, not from those who steal, meaning they don't provide the Torah, they hold it to themselves. Velo mitor misin, nor from those who are like lupines, which is a type of legume, which some Mefarshim say means not to bitter people either. Rabbi Yavo, when he would go from the yeshiva to the house of the Caesar, the noble woman would sing the following: Rabba de Imei, the Nasi of his nation, Midabrana de Umte, the leader of his people, means he was the financial leader, he took care of them. Botzina de Nahora, the radiant light, because he had a beautiful shine to himself. Barich Matiech l'Shalam, your arrival should come in peace. Let's move on now to the 5th section. Arifa Tegla b'Shlosha. We said in the Mishnah that the decapitation of the Egla Rufa was done with a court of 3. Means they would measure, according to Rabbi Shimon, it was Machloket, Rabbi Yehuda said 5, it had to be done with 5 people measuring from the Sanhedrin, the city that was closest to the dead person. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita, Yatzu zekenecha v'shoftecha. So it says the elders and the judges will leave your city. So Zekenecha Shnaim, Zekenecha is 2. Shoftecha Shnaim is another 2. Pein Beitin Shakul, you can't have an even court. Mosifin Alein Odechad, you add another 1. Harei Kan Chamisha Div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, therefore you have a total of 5. Rabbi Shimon Omer Zekenecha Shnaim, maybe Shimon says Zekenecha is 2. Vein Beitin Shakul, you can't have an even court. Mosifin Alein Odechad, you add 1 more. Harei Kan Shlosha, so you have a total of 3. Rabbi Shimon, Hai Shoftecha Mayavidli. What does he learn from the Shoftecha? It has to be members of the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yehuda is Ziknei Ziknecha Nafka. Rabbi Yehuda learns it out because it could have said Ziknei. The fact that it says Ziknecha teaches you also the Miuchadin. These people have to come from the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Shimon says back, Imi Ziknei. If you only had Ziknei Hava, I would have said Ziknei Ashuk, that it refers to just ordinary elders. Katav Rachmana Ziknecha, therefore it says Ziknecha. Iktiv Ziknecha. If it only said Ziknecha Hava, Mina Sanhedrin Ktana. So maybe it could be elders of the 23-person court. Katav Rachmana V'Shoftecha Miuchadin Sheb'Shoftecha. Therefore that's right, V'Shoftecha, that it means even members of the 71-person court. Rabbi Yehuda Gamar Ziknei Mi V'Smokvi V'Samchu Ziknei Aida. Now Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have an issue because he learns Gezerah Shava from the Parha Elam Davar Shal Tzibur Et Yedehem Mala Alam Yuchadim Shebeida Afkan Yuchadim Shebeida. So therefore he knows that there have to be Sanhedrin here just like there. But the Gemara says if that's true, I Aleph Leilaf Kulameyatam. So he could learn all of the entire idea, even the number 5 from there. So why does he need the drashot here to teach us number 5? So the Gemara says, why according to Rabbi Yehuda do you need these words here now? So rather, as Rashi explains, really does not learn the Gezerah Shava. And Shoftecha teaches you Miuchadin, the specific ones, which means from the Sanhedrin. But he has the Kenecha, and he also has the Vav of Shoftecha to teach us the number 2, which is a total of 4. Rabbi Shimon Vav Lo Darish, and Rabbi Shimon, as Tosafot explains, doesn't expound the Vav here, even though elsewhere he would make a drasha from the Vav. El Miyata says the Gemara, if that's true, V'yatzu Shnayim, V'yatzu is another 2. Umadadu Shnayim, that could be another 2 as well. So Rabbi Yehuda Arei Tisha, Rabbi Shimon Shiva. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you should need 9 people to engage in the measurement, and Rabbi Shimon, you should need 7. So the Gemara answers, those are used for other drashot. As it says, V'yatzu Hein V'lo Shluchan. V'yatzu teaches us that the Sanhedrin themselves have to go out. They can't just send representatives. It has to be actual members of the Sanhedrin. And Umadadu teaches us, Sha'afilu Nimtza, turning to Yadad and Bet, Ba'alila, even if it's clear which city it's closest to, Sarich La'asok B'mdida, you still have to measure. There's a mitzvah to measure which city it's closest to. Okay, let's continue now. The Gemara tells us that our Mishnah said you have 3 or 5 judges who would measure the dead body, which city it's closest to. But matnitin de loki aitana. Clearly, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The Tanya is the Braita teacher. Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. V'yatzuz kenecha v'shoftecha zekenecha zu Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin needs to be involved in the measurement. V'shoftecha ze melech v'kohen gadol. But also the king and kohen gadol had to engage. Melech is called shoftecha. Dichtiv as it says melech b'mishpat yamid aretz. Kohen gadol dichtiv v'vatel ha'kohanim alaviyim ve'la shofet. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov requires also the king and the kohen gadol, unlike our Mishnah. Yibaylu the Gemara wonders Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov b'chada palig or b'tarti palig. Is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov arguing on 1 point or 2? Regarding the king and Kohen Gadol, he's clearly arguing, but in regards to how many members of the Sanhedrin, either he holds 3 like Rabbi Shimon or 5 like Rabbi Yehuda. Or Dilmor, perhaps the Sanhedrin Nami Palig, the Amar Kula Sanhedrin, and he requires also the entire Sanhedrin to emerge, which means he would argue on 2 points. So Amar Rav Yosef Tashma, let's bring a proof. The Braita teaches us regarding a Zaken Mamre. Matzana Beit Pagi v'himra alei. And if the elder who's paskening against the Sanhedrin, they find him at Beit Pagi, which is outside of the place they sit, which is the Lishkat HaGazit. It's a outside area that was added on afterwards to Yerushalayim. So if they paskin and he still refuses their psak, you might think that's a rebellion that would require him to be put to death. Talmud Lomar it says no elamakom specifically. Melamed she'amakom gorem. No, it's the place that they need to paskin the halacha in Lishkat HaGazit in the Beit HaMikdash, and if he argues on them still, then he is put to death. So the Gemara says, "Denafu kama." How many of the Sanhedrin would emerge in the case of this Braita? Ile miktzatan, if it only means some of them emerge. Dilma hanach diika gavai kaimi kavate. But maybe the ones that remained in the Lishkat HaGazit actually paskin like him. So how can you even entertain putting him to death? They all came out. So Lamai, the Gemara says, how many? So for what? What was the purpose of them emerging? If it was only for something voluntary, nafki, could they all go out for something voluntary? We know the pasuk tells us in Shir Hashirim, Sharerecha ganasar. Your navel is like a crescent-shaped basin, referring to the Sanhedrin. Al yachsara mazeg. Don't diminish from the diluted wine. Now, what it refers to is that you have to always have at least 1/3 of the Sanhedrin, 23 people, remaining in the inner area where they would judge during the times of judgment, until 12 o'clock in the day. So clearly they can't all emerge. Elapshita lidvar mitzvah must be for a mitzvah. So hechidami, what's the mitzvah? Lav midat egla must be. This is for measuring for egla rufa. So says Rav Yosef, and we know it can't be Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon because only 3 members. It must be. Why do you need all of them? Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, Amar kuli Sanhedrin va'inan, that all the court would go out for measuring for egla rufa. So Amalei Abai is turned to Rav Yosef and he says, "Lo, not necessarily. There's another mitzvah they could have gone out for. Kegon shiatzulo asif ala ir v'al hazarot. We know that when they would add on to the city of Yerushalayim or onto the courtyards of the Beit HaMikdash, the entire Sanhedrin would participate. So that's why they went out. It's not like the Mishnah tells us. Ein mosifin ala ir. You cannot add on to the city of Yerushalayim, Val Hazarot, or the courtyards of Beit HaMikdash, Ela beBeit Din Shel Shivim Ve'echan, unless you have the entire court of Sanhedrin. Now the Gemara says, nonetheless, Tani Kavatei Rav Yosef, there is a braita that supports Rav Yosef to say that Rav Elazar ben Yaakov holds you need the whole court there. Matzana Beit Pagi, if they found this elder at the Beit Pagi, Ve'imran Alein, and he rebelled against them, Kegon, Sheyatz Ulam Didat Egla, for example, they went out to measure for Egla Rufa, means they all went out for that. Clearly, Rav Elazar ben Yaakov holds they all have to go out. He argues on both points. Or to add on to the city of Al Hazarot. Now, in the context there, you might think that's considered a rebellion. Is chayav mita. Talmud lomar v'kamta v'alita. Therefore, it says v'kamta v'alita makom. Melamed shamakom gorem. No, it needs to be in the place in the Lishkat HaGazit. But the point is, you see a proof to Rav Yosef that Rav Elazar ben Yaakov does argue on both points. Let's move on now to the 6th section of the day. We're going to talk about a series of things that require appraisals, hektish, and as we'll talk about now, you need 3 people to determine, if you don't know how much your netter ravai or maaser sheni is worth, how much it's worth to redeem it. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita, what does it mean it's not able to be determined? Unknown. So Gemara says, Perot she'erkivu v'yayin shehikrim u'ma'ot she'echlidu, means the produce has spoiled to some degree, so you need people to ascertain its value in its appraisal. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita, Ma'aser sheni she'en damav yidu'in podin oto b'shlosha lekuchot. So you require 3 merchants, Rashi says b'kiyim, who are proficient in this determination to estimate its value. Avalo b'shlosha she'en lekuchot, but not if they're not proficient. Afilu nochri echad min, and a guy could be one of them, as long as he's a merchant who's proficient in this. Afilu echad min ba'alim, and even the owner of it could be one of those 3. What if they're 3 but they're business partners? So Tashma, the Gemara says, bring a proof. You could have a man and his 2 wives as these 3 appraisers. So if you could have a man and his 2 wives, they're all being supported with the same money. It's like 3 businessmen together that are partners. You could use 3 businessmen. The Gemara says it's not a proof because maybe it's talking about a woman who's not being supported by her husband, which is the concept of Eini Nizoni Ve'eini Osa. But in a normal case, maybe they wouldn't be able to be, and business partners would not be able to be the appraisers either. Let's move on to let's continue over here. Hekteshot b'shlosha. We said in the Mishnah, hekteshot, which is movable hektish, requires 3 people to ascertain for its deconsecration. Matnitin delo ki aitana. Our Mishnah does not follow the following. The Tanya Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. Elazar ben Yaakov says, afilu tzinora shel hektish tzricha sarah b'nei adam liftota. Even these like small forks that were used for weaving gold strings would require 10 people to ascertain its value for redemption. So our Mishnah says 3, and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds you need 10, even for movable hektish. So Rabbi Elazar says to Abaye, Bishlam Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Amar Kishmuel. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds like Shmuel. The Amar Kishmuel says, Amar Shmuel, Sarah Kohanim Ktuvim Parasha. It says the word Kohanim in regards to ascertaining value 10 times in the parasha, 3 times in Erechin, 3 times in the movable hektish items, and 3 times in redemption of lands. So I understand why you need 10 regarding all of these things, lands or redemption of movables. It's the same. You need 10 as the parasha emphasizes. El Rabbanan Shlosha Menalu. But why would the rabbis say you need 3 for evaluating movable hektish? Maybe you'll say because it says it 3 times in that parasha. The problem is by land it says 4 times the word kohanim in terms of the appraisers. So, but we know we know that the Rabbanan and our Mishnah you need 10. So then why don't you need 4? Maybe you'll say nami, that you do need 4. But alama tanan, we learned in our Mishnah Karkaot Tisha v'Kohen that for lands to appraise its value for redemption, you need 9 plus a Kohen, you need 10 people. Elamai, what do you have to say? The Mishal Mibu Asara, that since it finishes off a total of 10 Kohanim between these 3 parshiot with the lands, so you need 10 for lands. The problem is Hekdeshot, the Mishal Mibu Shita, Hekdeshot, it concludes with 6 times that it says the word Kohen, because you have 3 in the parasha before about Arachin, and then 3 more in movable Hekdesh. So you should need 6. Libai Shita, you should need 6. The Gemara says, Kasha, this is indeed difficult to understand the position of the Rabbanan. Let's continue. Arachin chules. We said in the Mishnah, movable arachin. Arachin mitaltalin require 3 judges, 3 appraisers to ascertain its value. So the word is Maya arachin mitaltalin. Arachin is a word used when someone pledges his Torah value to be given to the Beit HaMikdash. But what does it mean, arachina metaltalin, of movables? So 3 pshatim. Amar of Gidel Amarav, Omer erech kli zelai. It's where somebody said, I'm giving the erech of this vessel. Amar of Gidel Amarav, turning to Tedvav Mud Aleph, Omer erech kli zelai, notein damav. If somebody says, I'm giving the erech of this vessel, you give its value. It's damim. My time, what's the reason? Adam yodeh she'en erech lekli. Because everyone knows a kli does not have an erech. V'gamar v'amar l'shum damim. So he declared this in order to give its value. He just was unclear. Mishum machi notein damav, that's why he gives its value. Asks the Gemara, how could that be pshat in the Mishnah? Hi arachina metaltalin. Why does it say the arachin of movables? It should say arachin shel metaltalin. It's mashma that the arachin is movable. So why does it say? It should really say arachin of movables. The Gemara says Tani, you should teach in the Mishnah arachin shel metaltalin. That's really what it means to say. This is the first answer of Gidel Amarav. Answer number 2 of Chizda. Rav Chizda Amar, Amar Avimai, b'matfis metaltal arachin. He pledged his value to be given to the Beit HaMikdash, his erech, and then he said that I'll use this vessel to cover my value. So the Gemara says, Hi arachina metaltalin shal arachin mibayil. It should be the opposite. Metaltalin of erachin is really the way that it should be said. The Gemara says, Tani metaltalin shal arachin. That's what it means to say. Third answer, Rabbi Avo Amar Ba'omer Erki Alai. It's where he pledged his value and he didn't pay it. So Ba Kohen Ligvot Mimenu, the Kohen came to collect from him. Metaltalin Bishlosha, like this. If he's collecting movables, he has to evaluate it with 3 people. Karkaot Ba'asara, and if he's taking land, so then it would have to be 10 people to evaluate it. Amar le Rav Achmi Difti Ravina. Rav Achmi Difti turned to Ravina and he said a question on the 3rd pshat. I understand according to the first 2 pshatim, what you're trying to do is to remove an item from its status of hektish. Now you don't want to leave any element of hektish there, because then there would be an isur mi'ilah to benefit from that in the future. So it makes sense why you need evaluators and you need appraisers to ascertain its value. But in the 3rd pshat that we said, Rabbi Avo, you're putting it into hektish. You're collecting this in place of what he owes. So what's the big deal if you make a little bit of a mistake? Why do you need 3 appraisers? What's the issue? So Ravina said back, Ravina answered back, Svarat's logic. Mali ilui, mali iyuli, mali afuki. What's the reason if it's entering hektish or being removed from hektish? Afuki my time. What's the reason to remove it from hektish? You need 3 appraisers. Dilmatai, because you might make a mistake. Iyulinami dilmatai, so maybe to put it into hektish too, you need 3 appraisers because you might make an error. Let's move on. Rabbi Yehuda argued. He said regarding these movables of hektish and erachin, you would need 3, but you need one of them to be a kohen. So Amalei Papala Abaye, Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda Hanu Dichtiv Kohen. According to Rabbi Yehuda, I understand it says kohen in the pasuk is need a kohen. El Rabbanan Kohen Lamali. But why, according to the Rabbanan, does it say Kohen in the Pasuk if you don't need a Kohen to be one of the appraisers? Kasha, this is difficult. Okay, we said in the Mishnah, Karkaot Tisha Kohen. So according to the Rabbanan, when it comes to lands, to deconsecrate the lands that were holy, you need 9 appraisers plus 1 as a Kohen, 10 people altogether. But not even where do we know this from? So Amar Shmuel Asara Kohanim Ktuvim Parsha. It says the word Kohanim as the appraisers 10 times. Chad Legufei, so 1 teaches us you need 1 Kohen. Hanach, the rest of them have a mi'ud achar mi'ud, are exclusionary terms after exclusionary terms. Ve'en mi'ud achar mi'ud el l'rabot. And that teaches us actually inclusion, which is that it's not specifically Kohen, but rather you could have 9 more Yisraelim, that's effective. Da'afilu tesha Yisraelim ve'echad Kohen, it would be effective if 9 Yisraelim and 1 Kohen would be the appraisers. Ma'atkif l'Rav Huna B'rei Rav Natan, Rav Huna B'rei Rav Natan asked the obvious question. He said, Eim chamisha Kohenim chamisha Yisraelim. Once you're using this strategy, so maybe start off like this. Say the first one is a Kohen. The second one is a mi'ud achar mi'ud to Yisrael, but then you go back to having a riboy, and then the third one is a new exclusion, which means it should be a Kohen. And if you continue like this, it should be 5 Kohenim and 5 Yisraelim. Kashya, this is indeed difficult. Now the Mishnah told us, "V'adam ki yotzeh bahen." When you redeem a person who is consecrated, you also need 9 people plus a kohen to appraise him. So Gemara says, "Adam mikadosh." It can't be referring to an eved because you wouldn't call him Adam. So who is this referring to? What type of a person could be sanctified? So Yavo ba'omer d'mei alai. So a person pledged his own value. The Tanya, as the Braita says, "Omer d'mei alai." If somebody says, "I'm pledging my value to hektish," aminoto ke'eved and karbashuk, we estimate his value as a slave who be sold in the slave market. Ve'eved it gish lekarkot, and since slaves are compared to properties, like it says, so therefore you need 9 plus a kohen, like the evaluation of properties. How many people would you need to deconsecrate hair that had been consecrated? Kigaz's dummy, but it's hair that's ready to be cut. Kigaz's dummy, do we say it's like it's already cut and therefore vishlosha, it's like movables that require a cord of 3. Or kimechuber dummy, or it's like attached to vasara and you need a cord of 10, like deconsecrating lands that have been holy. So Tashma, let's bring a proof because the Braita teaches us a related debate. Hamaktishet avdo ein ma'alin bo. The Tanakama says if you sanctify your eved, there is no isser of me'ilah because he's compared to properties. And there's no isser of me'ilah when it comes to properties that had been sanctified. You're not chayav from Me'ilah. It's usher to actually benefit from it as hektish, but you won't be chayav like the Yisur of Me'ilah. Rabbi Shimon says, no, there is Me'ilah in his hair. The kaimal, and we paskin over there, the bisaro, me'ligzos pligi. The debate is where the hair is long enough that it's ready to be detached. So Shema Mino, we see that this is exactly the machloket. That according to the Tanakama who says that there's no Isur Me'ilah in his hair, it's because it's considered connected. The Tanakama would hold here too in this question that the hair would need to be evaluated by 10 people. It's like karka. Shimon Gamliel says it's considered detached, and therefore also in regards to, and there is mi'ila, and therefore also in regards to evaluation, you only need 3 people. Says the Gemara, Ne'ema hani tanai kani tanai. Let's assume that the Tanaic debate we're about to quote is the same underlying machloket. The Tanah, the Mishnah of Mitzvah tells, Rameir says, Yesh tvarim she'en kekarka ve'enan kekarka. There are things that look like land, but they don't have the same halacha of land, which is that although land you can't make a shvuah of moda b'miktzat ta'ana, here you would. Ve'en chachamim modim lo, but the chachamim disagree. Ketzar, what's the case? Well, first, 2 people walk into court. One says to the other, I gave you 10 vines full of grapes, and we're going to see these grapes were ready to be picked, but they were attached to the ground. The other one said, there was only 5. Rabbi Meir says that you be chayav a shvuah because he holds that those grapes would be considered disconnected already, and therefore you do make a shvuah, as it's like modem and mikzat ta'ana, not on property, and you make a shvuah. And he'd hold like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel before in regards to the hair being an isser of me'ilah. That anything that's attached to the ground is like the ground, like the Rabbanan before, and therefore you don't make a shvuah because you can't make a shvuah. The debate here is where the grapes are ready to be picked. So Marsa, Rabbi Meir, like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds kibtzurot damyan, that it's like they're detached, so you make a shvuah. Marsa, the Chachamim hold lav kibtzurot damyan, it's not considered detached, so you don't make a shvuah. So the Gemara says, lo, afilu tema Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir could be like the Rabbanan in the previous debate, that the hair is not an isser of me'ilah. Ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Meir Hasan Meili says considered detached. You chayav a shvuah here. Kol kama deshafka lahu mekachashi. Because as long as you leave those grapes on more, it gets worse. So that's considered detached because it'll rot. Abasaro, but hair kol kama deshafka lahu ashbuche mishpach. If you leave it, it gets better. So maybe you'd agree with the Chachamim that's considered attached. In regards to that, there wouldn't be Isur of Me'ilah in the previous debate. Let's move on to the 7th and final section of the day. We said in the Mishnah, moving on to the 2nd section of the Mishnah now, capital cases that require 23 judges. And we said in the Mishnah that if an animal is rovea a person, means an animal has relations with a person and the animal is the active party, so there is going to be an adjudication of 23 people to know if they should put the animal and this person to death. So kapazik vitani loshna rovea zachar v'loshna rovea nekeva. Mishnah does not distinguish if the animal had relations, but again, the animal's the active party and the person's the passive party, whether it was rovea, a woman, or even a man. So the Gemara says, Bishlam rovea nekeva dechtiv arakta ta'isha v'tabeima. We know that regarding if it has relation to the woman, it says that you put the woman and the animal to death, and we compare them, just as the woman requires a cord of 23, also the animal does. El rovea zachar min nalan. Now, where the man is the active party, we have a pasuk for that. But where the animal is, where do we know that when it has relation with a man, also would require a cord of 23. Dichtiv, because the pasuk says an extra verse. Kol shochevim be'ema mot yumat. Anybody that sleeps with an animal will surely be put to death. Now, it's not necessary to teach us if a man is the active participant with an animal, the animal needs a court of 23, because we know that already. So it must be, is to teach us where the man is the passive party, the animal still requires a court of 23. It uses the word shochev, that the man is, the animal is shochev, to compare that in a scenario, that the man is shochev, that even if he's the active party, it's the same as if he's the passive party. Just as if he's the active party with the animal, it requires 23 to adjudicate the animal. The same thing would be if he's the passive party, him and the animal would require a court of 23 to adjudicate. We're stopping at the bottom of Chabtet Vav Amud Aleph. Baruch Hashem, we did 2.5 blot of review today, 2.5 dapim. And we'll pick up next week, this coming week, tomorrow, with the bottom of Tetvav Amud Aleph, turning to Tetvav Amud Bet, continuing to discuss cases of capital judgments that require courts of 23 to adjudicate. Shavua Tov, everyone. A wonderful week. All the best.